looking at 4-2 work together, we are going to be looking at Omar Bohi's company using this chart of accounts here at the top. And we need to post from this journal here, page 1 of this journal. We are going to post into the various accounts down here at the bottom. So notice how you'll need to hit that little caret there to drop down each individual account as you need it. So the first account that we're going to post to is Omar Bohi Capital. Remember, we're only posting right now what's these numbers that are in the general column. Okay, so the first one, Omar Bohi Capital, a credit of $2,500. So we're going to come down here to our general ledger and walk through those 5 steps. So our 5 steps of posting, starting with the date, then the page number, the debit or the credit, then we update the balance, and then finally put the account number in the journal. So step 1, we're going to take our date, which was April 1st. So April 1st, all in one section. Step 2, the page number. So we're at page 1. So in the post reference, we have page 1. Step 3, was it a debit or a credit? We had a credit of $2,500. And since that's the only number that we have so far, our balance or our running total is just $2,500. Last thing we need to do is take this account number 310, bring it back up into our journal, account number 310. Then we move on to the next one, prepaid insurance, April 3rd, debit of $330. So I'm going to go to prepaid insurance, April 3rd, page 1, a debit of $330. After we get our debit in there, we need to step 4, update our balance. So we have a debit balance of $330. If it's a debit here, then it'll be a debit over here if it's just the only number that we have. Final step, account number 140. Back into our journal. Then move down to the next. So supplies. On the 4th, a debit of $160. So come down in here, April 4th, page 1, a debit of $160. So our balance is $160, account number 130. Moving to the next line, accounts payable, credit of $160. So accounts payable, ready supply, April 4th, page 1, credit of $160. So our balance is $160 credit. Credit here, it's a credit in our balance. Account number 210, back up in our journal. Now this one, our check mark entry, where we use 2 special count columns, sales and cash, there's nothing in the general column for us to post. So here, we'll need another check mark. So there's nothing to post for that line. Moving down to the 9th, accounts receivable, Dan Carroll. Go into his account. This would be April 9th. Still on page 1, a debit of $122. So our balance is a debit of $122. Take account number 120 back up into our journal. Next, on the 12th, we have rent expense, a debit of $260. The rent expense, April 12th, still on page 1, a debit of $260. So our balance is a debit of $260. Account number 510, back up into our journal. Next, we have accounts payable, ready supplies, a debit of 80. So go into accounts payable, ready supply, and that is April 15th, page 1, a debit of 80. Now we have a balance of credit of 160. Now we're doing a debit of 80. So when you have a debit and a credit, you need to find the difference between the two. So the difference between 160 and 180 is 80. And we are left with 80 credit when we find the difference between the two. So our balance is now a credit of 80, which is the difference between a credit of 160 and a debit of 80. Take the bigger number minus the smaller number, and we're left with a balance of 80 credit. Take account number 210, back up into the journal. 2 more lines. The next line on the 16th, we have a credit of 65 to accounts receivable Dan Carroll. So April 16th, page 1, credit of 65. So we had a balance of 122. Now we have a credit of 65. So we need to find the difference between those two. So 122 minus 65, we are left with 57. And that would be a debit because we had more debit than we had credit. So the difference between 122 and 65 is a debit of 57. Finally, we put account number 120 back into the journal. Last transaction that we need to post into our general ledger, Omar Bohe drawing a debit of 500. So we have April 25th, page 1, a debit of 500. First number and only number, so our balance is just a debit of 500, pretty simple. And account number 320 back up into our journal. When you have a number or a check mark in the post reference column, every single line, then you know that you have posted everything on that page.